Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty provocative argument about who really holds the power in America. The source material for this one claims that all the political division we see every day, well, that's not an accident, it's a strategy. So let's dig into the claims and see how they build their case.
Right at the heart of the whole argument is this idea right here. What if the political battles we see on TV aren't the real conflict? The source suggests it's a deliberate divide-and-conquer tactic. It's designed to keep us all focused on fighting with each other so we never look up and challenge where the real power is.
All right, so to really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 4 parts. First, we'll lay out the basic idea. Then we'll dive into the main case study they use. After that, we'll see how they claim this system works on a bigger scale, and finally, we'll look at the specific action they're calling for.
Okay, let's start with a central argument. And it's important to get this, it's not about left versus right. The whole thing is framed as a conflict between a very small, very organized donor class and, well, everyone else, the American public, who they say are disorganized and kept divided on purpose. So, according to the source, how does this elite group hold on to its power? By keeping the rest of us busy fighting each other. The idea is that all the ongoing culture wars and partisan battles are just carefully crafted distractions. They use up all our collective energy, so the real power structure never, ever gets challenged. So, to make this argument less theoretical and more concrete, the source material focuses in on one very specific case study. It's presented as the perfect example of how this whole system of influence actually works in the real world.
The argument kicks off with some really eye-popping numbers. The source claims that a staggering 94%, that's almost every single member of the U.S. Congress, has received campaign contributions from pro-Israel lobby groups.
And it's not just about how many politicians get money, but how much. For a big chunk of Congress, we're talking about 82% of them, who consistently vote in line with the lobby's interests. The source claims the average contribution was $125,000 per member in just one election cycle. So, what's the supposed return on that investment? Well, the source draws a direct line from that money to over 300 times billion dollars in total U.S. aid over the years. This number is framed not as simple foreign policy, but as the direct result of influence that was bought and paid for.
But how does that money actually turn into political outcomes? Well, the source points to Nina Turner's primary race in Ohio as Exhibit A. The claim is that a huge $4 million ad spend combined with a very specific media narrative was enough to completely vaporize what was once a massive 35-point lead, and she lost.
Now, a word that comes up a lot here is gaslighting, and it's used to describe the media's alleged role. The specific definition they use is this. It's when the media takes a position that seems pretty reasonable, like, say, just questioning foreign aid, and then frames it in a way that makes it sound totally extreme or hateful. It basically shuts down any real debate before it can even start.
And to really hammer this point home, the source uses a clever little Mad Libs analogy. The idea is, you take a talking point about Israel and then just swap in the name of another country. So if the statement is, you owe Israel $300 billion, the response is often an accusation. But if you change it to say, you owe Thailand $300 billion, the response is totally different, right? It's just, what? No, we don't. The argument is that this shows a totally different set of rules applies to this one topic.
Okay, so let's pull back and look at the bigger picture. The source uses that case study as a kind of template to describe what it sees as a much larger system, a system that it claims applies to a lot of other powerful interests in America too. The core argument here is that this is not an isolated thing. The source says it's the same playbook, lobbying, campaign cash, media framing, and it's used by other powerful players. Think Big Pharma fighting against lower drug prices, or the tech industry getting huge government subsidies. The CHX Act is held up as a prime example of this. The source calls it a massive corporate subsidy, over $50 billion, passed without any real strings attached. And then they point out that Intel, one of the biggest recipients, got at least $8 billion and then immediately turned around and announced thousands of layoffs. So you have to ask, who really benefited from that?
And this brings us to the central metaphor that ties it all together. The robbery, they say, is the transfer of our money, taxpayer money, to corporations and special interests. And the getaway car, that's the mainstream media, which allegedly provides cover and makes the whole thing seem normal.
So why would the media play this role? Well, the source suggests a really simple motive: money. Their biggest clients are the very companies and political groups they're supposed to be holding accountable.
When drug companies and political campaigns are your top advertisers, there's a pretty strong incentive not to rock the boat.
So after all that, where does this argument actually go? The source doesn't just point out a problem. It proposes a very specific solution, one that's designed to create immediate and direct consequences for politicians.
The solution is a campaign called the Not Another Dollar Pledge. It's a really simple idea for voters. You promise to vote against any incumbent who takes money from these specific lobby groups or who votes for more funding. And the key to the whole strategy is to use the primary elections. That way you can enforce the pledge without having to vote for the other party. The whole principle behind this is about sovereignty. The goal is to break that link between donor money and what gets done in Washington. It's about forcing elected officials to actually listen to their voters for a change, instead of their funders. And to put this entire theory to the test, the source issues a challenge. It's a challenge to all the major polling organizations out there. Just ask Americans one simple question. Does America owe Israel any more money? The argument is that the answer would reveal a massive gap between what the public actually wants and what the politicians are doing. And that brings us to the final, lingering question from the source material. If that poll was done and an overwhelming majority of Americans said no, what happens then? If public opinion is so clearly on one side and the entire political establishment is on the other, what does that really tell us about who holds the power? And more importantly, what happens next?